Is it the 13th or what? So, welcome everybody. And tonight we're going to get started with grandparents with dogs. And I love this topic because it's so important, especially around holiday times. I want to welcome Gail. And it's really fun to do a webinar with you. It's been quite a while. So welcome and thank you so much for joining me with this.
Yeah,
we
lost somebody.
It's all right.
Yeah.
They can pop back in. This is run through Family Paws Parent Education, and I'm Jen Shryock, and I am the founder of Family Paws Parent Education. We run two programs, Dogs and Storks, Dogs and Toddlers, and we are all about creating dog-aware generations. So we welcome everybody, and Gail, how about a little bit about yourself?
Well, I've been training dogs for about 30 years. I am a grandparent. I've been a Family Paws parent educator for more than 5 years.
Yeah.
And I really love working with parents, with kids and dogs. And ever since I've been a grandparent, it kind of puts a whole different perspective on things to me.
Absolutely.
So, yeah. You get a lot of surprises with your own dogs when you have a new baby around. So.
Excellent. So I'm really glad you were able to join me tonight so you can give me another perspective. I have 4 children, but am not a grandparent, but definitely have some different experiences. So thank you for joining in.
Yeah.
All right, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Some of the reasons why this topic is so important and near and dear to me is that unfortunately many dog bites happen during family gatherings. So a lot of times when we have holidays, we're going to see an escalation in the number of dog bites for a variety of reasons. And we'll talk a little bit about that. Family gatherings equal food, all sorts of things. The other thing is the children that are visiting may not be as familiar with the dog. So if you are a grandparent and you have visiting children, or your dog is going to the grandkids' home, either way, there could be some conflict because there's not as much familiarity. And then we're going to talk a little bit about the expectations of the children and the dog, differences of opinions within the family, but also basics, passive supervision and differences in comfort level. And we're also going to address differences in communication that can lead to misunderstanding. So jumping right in, I don't know, I think about the holiday time, and I think about, our dogs might really pair certain scents with different behaviors. And I think, gosh, when do I cook a turkey? And it's pretty much 1 or 2 times a year that I actually cook a turkey that's going to make my house smell really yummy and good. And there's a different energy that goes on. I might be, when I'm expecting people to come, there might be more cleaning, more getting ready, more stress. I don't know, Gail, what do you think around holiday time?
Well, and if you're a grandparent and you don't typically have kids in the house, that's there. You have that whole thing as well, too.
Right.
Everything else.
Yeah.
So.
Right. So there could be extra activity as you're getting ready. There could be, any number of things. So whenever people are preparing for house guests or going I don't know, for me, my dogs know when I'm leaving and traveling. And again, it's the same kind of thing. My routine, my energy, my excitement, different items they associate with maybe a change. But there's often a lot of things. So that can equal stress. Holiday time is often a time of stress for everybody. As good as it is, and it's great, we love getting together, it also can be a stressful time, just getting ready for everything. So our dogs pick up on all that, and that can make things difficult. But if we're having guests over, it begins with that, right? So we get the doorbell, and the doorbell is the immediate trigger for most of our dogs to go out of their mind. And so unfortunately, that can be the beginning of a long day of excitement. So one of the things I do recommend is making sure your guests don't ring the doorbell necessarily. They can text you. You can have alternatives for them. Like I like having a basket outside the front door. Our shepherd gets a toy if someone comes in the house. Things like that. What do you think about that? Anything you want to add there, Gail?
No, I think those are all really good hints. And the more in advance that you can practice those things, not waiting till the last second when you're having come over, the better it is for your dog as well. I know with some little dogs, I'll actually teach them to actually run up the stairs a little bit and greet people from a couple stairs up.
Good. Yeah, definitely. And thinking about it ahead of time, I think, is the name of the game, right? So I think sometimes we get caught off guard when our dogs tend to go crazy, or maybe someone comes early, and it can just be really difficult. So that whole scenario can be a situation that causes issue. But anyway, if our dogs, typically doorbells, I always tell people this time of year really gets our dog. We get a lot of dogs that are very reactive to doorbells. In our neighborhood, when they deliver a package, they ring the doorbell and leave, or they honk the truck's horn, which gets my dogs they don't get nuts anymore, but they used to. That horn honking used to make them alert that someone was coming to the door, and then they would get very excited. But sometimes they leave a package and ring the doorbell, which always always is joyful for my animals. Oops, sorry. I did it again.
At holidays, a lot of times the people who are coming in are bringing packages in. They're bringing food in a lot of times.
Food.
Very different thing for most dogs as well.
Yeah, so I almost encourage people to just have their dogs away for a little bit during that really high traffic time, and let all the humans kind of transition, and then bring the dogs out when things are calmer and everybody's settled in, because and we'll talk about greetings and why it is so conflicting for many dogs, but it is definitely one of those triggers. So the other thing is, a lot of times we have expectations of our dogs. Grandkids grow up very quickly. So a dog that might have been really, really great with some older children, and say there's a new baby, and the baby's maybe 6 months, 8 months, 10 months, a year, 2 years, that dog who might have been fantastic with older children may have some discomfort and not be as welcoming of the younger children, partly because the dog is aged, partly because every child is unique and different, and also too because maybe if that child is not around the dog on a regular basis, then it can be a little uncomfortable or a little excessively stressful. So there's a lot of things to consider when there's visiting grandchildren, or if you're bringing your dog to grandchildren's homes. And the other part of that is not all children are comfortable with dogs. So really finding out from your guests what their comfort level is. And if the parents are not comfortable with dogs, or there's an issue there and there's a level of discomfort, then I would honor that. And it's in your dog's best interest to really pay attention to comfort levels when it comes to children, especially, and their parents' feelings about the dog. So my husky here absolutely loved older children. So kids 5 and up, he was very comfortable with. Not so much my toddler. And we'll expand on that a little bit. But anything else you wanted to add there, Gail?
No, the only thing I was going to say is that I think we can't always predict how our dog is going to be. One of my dogs absolutely loves little children. And when I had my grandson came over for the first time, he was an infant. She had never been around infants before. And this is an extremely sociable dog.
Right.
She actually went and hid behind the chair. And I honestly had absolutely zero idea that she was going to react that way. So even with dogs who you would normally think are super friendly and are great around kids, you just really can't necessarily always predict it.
Right. And how did that make you? Did that make you feel a certain way, or did it make you feel like, how did that make you feel about your dog?
I felt sad.
Yeah.
Because with her, I have three dogs. So the other two I didn't even have in the room because I thought they might, it was his first time over, and I just thought, didn't really want to deal with them and him,
Right.
and whereas with her, I figured, okay, this is no big deal, and so I was really shocked when it happened. She didn't do
Right.
anything, but she was clearly freaked out, and it took a while for her to get used to him, and now they're buddies. He's
Yeah.
3 now, but it took a while before she really
Right.
got used to him, and
Right. And I think a lot of people can relate to what you're talking about. And I think it, I know, I hear lots of different descriptions, but I think sometimes it's easy to take it personally, like, to take that on and feel like, oh, he doesn't like the kids. Oh, come here. Like, you talk to your dog, like, it's okay. It's all right. Come on closer, closer, closer. So I love that you said that you kind of allowed him to, to do his thing, because I think sometimes it's easy to feel like we need to force that interaction or encourage it. And I hear that often. And I think that there's this social pressure a little bit that our dog should automatically know that the child is important to all of us and everything else. And when our dog runs away or shows some kind of a different reaction than we're expecting or wanting or hoping for, then, we have to remember to allow that, to kind of embrace what's going on in that moment and try to see what we can do to make it a comfortable situation, and certainly not force interaction.
yeah.
Yeah, especially for a dog that's asking for space. So,
Yeah. Well, and I think, before he came over, we had these ideas of that we were going to get pictures together and that type of thing. And that all went out the window. We're like, this is
right.
not a good idea. There's a lot of time left in their lives to do that type of thing.
Well, and that's a hugely important message that I think a lot of people can relate to. So yeah, thanks for sharing that. So part of what I think contributes to this challenge is that from the beginning, there's differences in communication. From the moment we give birth, moms and babies make eye contact, and the distance between the breast and the pupil is intended there to build a relationship and a bond. We bond through eye contact. We, get, it triggers oxytocin and all those nice, warm fuzzies. And so it's really, really natural that our children would want and expect direct eye contact to be a natural way to interact with a dog and approach and that kind of thing. But puppies and kittens, they don't rely on eye contact from birth. They have scent and warmth and all that stuff. But our human babies do. So all growing up, they're going to be, they'll hear I remember in preschool, when I was teaching, eyes on me, 1, 2, 3, eyes on me. And look at me when I'm talking to you. I'm sure you all have heard that at some times in your life. So eye contact is so important to we as humans, and therefore, it's what our kids know. And so down here on the right is my daughter with her stuffed animal. So, I mean, it's, direct frontal eye contact. So even though it's really important to us, it doesn't have the same meaning for our dogs, and it can be really uncomfortable, especially if a dog isn't used to having a child down on their level or in their, smaller than the adults in the home. It can feel intimidating and threatening, and some dogs might react like your dog did and go hide and say, "Oh, not me. I don't, I don't understand that," or "It makes me uncomfortable." So there can be some differences there right from the beginning. Anything else you wanted to add there, Gail?
No, the only thing I was going to say is that typically sometimes also when grandkids come over, they're not used to having that dog around either.
Right.
So a lot of times, compared to when you have children in your house, the grandchild will be a little bit more exuberant sometimes about trying to interact with the dog because they don't get to see the dog as often. And
so
that puts
true.
a lot of extra stress on the dog as well.
Oh, yeah. So, yeah, absolutely. That's a really good point. And it can happen, everybody has good intentions, but it can be uncomfortable. And so we want to pay attention to that. Another thing, and we talked about this, just hit on it briefly with the doorbell, is that there are differences in greeting rituals. I mean, I'm grateful I'm not a dog and that is not my greeting ritual. That is not cool. But they're rather fond of how they greet. So sniffing is what they do. Whereas we do this big hug and animation, and usually, especially if it's a family gathering and people are traveling and all sorts of stuff, you think about how excited it is at the front door. So to our dogs, that's a little confusing, you know. It can be really confusing. It can be very confusing from the point of view that people are excited, people are reaching for each other. There might be small children, moving around, all sorts of stuff. So it creates a lot of excitement. And so having a plan for when people are going to arrive, where's your dog going to be? What is your game plan? What do you want your guests to do to keep arousal at a minimum is really, really, really important. Having a gate that they're behind, having them upstairs for a short time. Are they going to be on leashes? What is your game plan? What does that look like? And then how can you prepare your guests? I know it can feel a little uncomfortable, but because that front door tends to be a moment of excitement at times during gathering times, we want to have a plan and we want to kind of diffuse that a little bit. Another thing to keep in mind is how you behave every time you return home. Is it a celebration? Is it a party? If you live alone or you live just adults in the home, it can be, your dogs, you come home and yay! So your dog might already be super excited with front doors. So thinking about that, should they, maybe guests for that can come in a different way, or just have a plan. Think about what it is you would like to happen, because no one likes to start the visit off. And I remember this fondly, not so fondly, in my own childhood with 6 dogs in the house. And whenever anybody came, it was horrible. It was so stressful for me because my mom would be yelling and there was never a plan. There was never a plan. And of course, we were worried about dogs getting out the front door and all that. So do yourself a favor and plan ahead. Anything you wanted to add, Gail?
No, other than
I'm in at any time.
I think just, keeping in mind that the dogs don't have to say hi to everybody is the second they walk in the door too. And sometimes I think people feel like, their dog needs to say hi when they say hi, and they really don't.
Right. And that can be a mindset change a little bit, because, it definitely, it can definitely be a shift in how you're thinking about it. I guess what I would say is along those lines, if we think about setting up our children for success, I remember my kids all going through a phase and a period where they would feel very shy. They didn't want guests or anybody looking at them. And, a little note ahead of time, like, we're going through this, phase right now. So can help. And I think the same is true for our dogs. So the dogs go through those phases too, where they're feeling a little uncomfortable and that kind of thing. And if you think about it, yes, we want to include the dog, but we want to include them in a way that they're going to feel safe and secure and comfortable versus stressed out. So think about those things and set them up for success. And they can be a little overwhelmed with that initial excitement. Yeah. So the other angle that we run into where conflicts tend to arise is displays of affection. We give affection, hugging and, playing around and lots of different things. But dogs, last I checked, they don't go around hugging each other. So when we hug each other, sometimes, and I hear this often, our dog gets really jealous when we hug. He gets right in between us. And, I call my shepherd the fun police or the cuddle police because, any kind of fun needs to stop in their opinion. But, affection's different. So dogs like to play. They kind of do this kind of thing when they're playing around and goofing off. And You know, there's all sorts of displays of affection and fun and games when we have family gatherings. And that can be rather confusing and stressful for our dogs, because they don't understand necessarily what's going on. And is it excitement in a risky way, or is it that, you know, it's confusing. Cats, I always love cats because they really are very clear about what they like. And I don't know why they get away with it, but they, I always think of the cats as giving that love nip when they're done with you, kind of making it clear. But I like how they ask for more. They lean into it. You know, and this brings me to a concept that we talk about a lot, and I credit this to my cat, Jack, that I would pet him twice, and then usually after about that third pet, he would go to nip my hand, and I'd say, oh, okay, he's done. So then I would pet, pause, and see what he chose to do. Did he come in over to me for more, touching, or did he start to ferociously clean himself and let me know I was offended every hair in his body? So those are just important things to pay attention to. So our affection, our display of affection versus our dogs can get us into trouble, because a lot of children think that how we would give love to our mom or dad, hugging them, giving them a kiss, and a lot of parents misunderstand this as well and encourage their kids to go up and give the dog a kiss or say goodnight, give them a hug goodnight, say I'm sorry, go hug your dog, say I'm sorry. And unfortunately, those kinds of encounters can lead to a bite or, maybe a growl. Sometimes the dog will just walk away, but in many, it's not something we encourage, because it's confining, it's too close, and it's not a normal form of affection that a dog's going to understand.
You made a good point a minute ago too, Jen, about your cat and how if you wanted more affection, he would come forward to get it from you.
Yes.
And that's really important with the dogs too, is that if they're not going up to the child, then they don't, they're going to, if they want to have some attention from the child, they'll go towards the child. If they're moving away, then that means they're done.
Yeah, absolutely. And often, if we pet, pause, then we'll see, like with dogs, they might lick themselves, or they might shake off, or they might just walk away. And I think the sooner we can teach kids that, hey, that's okay, say thank you and move on, it's really good. Yeah. But definitely not hugs. I think a lot of us make that mistake. And these were my boys many years ago. I don't often see that kind of behavior now, although they're very close, but still. But I think it's so cute.
Even for dogs who like to get hugs from certain people, most dogs don't. Mm-hmm. But dogs who might like it from one person, it doesn't mean they're going to like it from everybody.
Yeah, excellent point. And that is so confusing, because if it is your own personal dog that has a familiarity bond with you and knows, and you're the trusted adult, there's a relationship, and so that comfort level is so different than if you're an unfamiliar or unsteady child, or that's a whole different situation, or an unfamiliar adult. My dogs, I have several that like one that snuggles up to you as close as possible, but that doesn't mean I can snuggle up to her. She's, so that's not at all her game. It's always on her terms, and it's what we understand, but someone could easily misread that and go, oh, but she loves attention. Yes, she does, on her terms. So allowing her to kind of, allowing our dogs to have their preferences, I think also too is really important. And sometimes we forget to do that. We want to be close to our dog. I would love it if my cats would let me snuggle them. There's no way. There's no way. So I kind of let them snuggle with me on their terms. But like you're saying with the hugs, that can be very confusing. So when we talk about hugs and how it is not comfortable for most dogs, and most dogs don't like it, so many people say, my dog loves it. And if you're an adult and you want to see what your dog really kind of feels and thinks, I always encourage people to videotape it and check it out. Is your dog licking their lips? Are they pulling their head back like this? What are they doing? Is it just fine with them? I love Colleen Pilar always says, fine is not enough. We want it to be good and comfortable. We want to create a positive experience. So thinking and being considerate about what's comfortable. It's an interesting thing. Videotape is really interesting in those situations. So good point. Thanks. Thanks for adding that. That's why I invited you. So full disclosure here, this is my son. These are both my sons many, many years ago. They're 23 and 22 now. So, and this is my girl, Corinne. And she definitely was not a fan, but I didn't know that. And I think most of us are in this position, we all have a level, I call it dog aware skills. We all have dog aware skills where we look at the dog and we have a thought of what they might be feeling. And I encourage people to stay curious about that. Look at the ears, the eyes, the tail, the muzzle, look at everything, be a doggy detective, check out everything the dog is offering, because that is how they communicate with their facial muscles, their tail, are they leaning forward? Are they leaning back? And sometimes it's easy to not pay attention to those signals. And here's a great example of that. I was supervising, but I had no idea what I was looking at. I really didn't. And when I look at it now, it seems so obvious. We can see some whale eye, really tight mouth here. Obviously, my son is leaning on her. Not a great idea. And the tension just between the eye and the ear, and she's giving me that brow. Her eyebrows up. I love the eyebrows because it really kind of gives it away. So that's not a relaxed dog. So was there a bite? Did something bad happen? No. But that was an encounter that my dog did not enjoy with my son. And it's not something, she's clearly letting me know, I don't like this. And so loving my dog is by saying, I hear you. And I validate that, and I'm not going to let it happen again. And I think, that allows our dogs to be successful. And so the more that you can become familiar with what these subtle signals are, that dogs offer us, the stronger your dog aware skills are, the better you're able to help support your dog, especially during the stressful times or the busy family gathering times. I think it's really, really important. We definitely recognize when our children are stressed, but our dogs, it's a little different. And so down here, there's my son doing what I now know. I did not know at that time. My dog aware skills were very limited, and that's the thing. I still feel like they are. I'm always learning and growing, and I love when people have interest in learning and expanding their dog aware skills. So here he is hugging her, giving affection. I'd even bet my husband said, give Corinne love or something like that. And she's doing what often dogs do, is a tongue lick. So she's sticking her tongue out. She didn't just eat. She's not drinking water. She's stressed. So this is a distance increasing behavior that a lot of dogs will do. We don't see it. We often don't see it. If you're lucky enough to have multiple dogs, you might see how they do this with each other or with a cat in the house. But paying attention to subtle things like this, it means more than you think. So another dog would go, oh, I see it, okay. And they'd turn away, or they would do something to kind of increase the distance. But in this situation, he's not seeing it. He's hugging her. So she's confined, and he would never see what she's doing anyway. So she's demonstrating, I'm stressed out, I don't like this, and he's not receiving those signals. So, as grandparents, you have an opportunity to help with the education and help create a safe environment for your child, but also for your grandchildren, but also to help them with their dog aware skills with all dogs, that apply with all dogs. And I think that that's really exciting. What they learn at home and at your house, and while you're out and about and engaging is so important. And I know, Gail, that's really important with your relationship with your grandson.
Yeah, it's fun teaching them how to read the dog, you know, and they can be like the little doggy detective. Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
So Jen, did you want to mention, like in situations like this with your son down on the bottom,
Yeah.
there are times where the dog will turn and lick the child then?
So true. It's definitely true that sometimes they'll turn and lick the child, which could be, there are times, and a lot of people will think, oh, it's just love. I think he loves them so much. And this is so misunderstood sometimes. Dogs lick for a variety of reasons. On our YouTube channel that I included in your original link, that was the right link, the YouTube channel. But there are several videos that talk about dog licks. So one of the things that I find is dogs will lick as it's, you know, it's what I reference as kiss to dismiss. It's a way to kind of be like, back up. I need some space. So they might do a little flick first, and then it's more of a push. And usually people pick up on it because it's intense. It has a different feel for it. You know, it's not a loose dog. They're not wagging their tail and happy. They're tightening. They're getting tense. Their facial muscles are tense. So, you know, think about that when your dogs are licking. Sometimes it's one of those things that it might be, you know, I want a little space from this particular person or situation. Yeah. Did I explain that enough?
Yeah. I think so.
So here's where communication clashes. Now, I will say that this is a stuffed dog. It's a darn good, accurate looking stuffed dog, though. Yeah, and so this is where things, you know, things get a little misunderstood is, you know, kids want to give affection and we want them to be affectionate. However, we're still, I think, transitioning to being a society that says, you know what, it is really important that affection is mutual, but it's enjoyed by both parties, not just the child or the dog. I don't want a dog going up and being obnoxious to a child either. But it's really important that it's a give and take, and that we're helping our kids to understand and starting to help them with dog aware skills right from the beginning through our modeling, showing them how we would like them to interact and engage by how we interact and engage with our dogs. So unfortunately, when I go to any event in the public and I have my stuffed dogs out sitting down, almost every child comes up and hugs them. And, you know, it's, you know, we might go, oh, but then I go, wow, you know, what if that was a real dog? We really need to provide some more education and information on that. But we don't want kids going up, especially hugging and interacting with unfamiliar dogs like this. So that's where the communication really can clash. So let's look at this example. This is not a Family Paws video. It's from YouTube. And but it's a good example of, you know, and it's a very good example that I probably could have done in my own home at some point many years ago. So when I want to look at it from the point of view of understanding that we're all wanting to encourage nice, loving interaction, but we might need to shift how we're encouraging that. Oh, sorry. Said my internet was going weird.
What were you doing, Otis? Were you giving him big hugs? Mommy. We're giving big hugs to Otis. Do you love Otis very much?
So pay attention to Otis, where his eyes go, and his mouth, and let's just watch that a little more.
Big squeezers.
Look at Mom.
For Otis. Careful of his head, buddy.
There was a lick there.
Oh, you're wiping your nose on him? Yeah. You're
Looking at Mom.
Gentle pets.
So he's checking in.
Gentle, sweet pets. Yeah. Oh, Otis got an itch. He got an itch. He got an itch. Is he scritching? Oh, did you give him a kiss?
Checking in again.
Did you get some dog hair on your tongue?
Oh.
Did you get some dog hair on that tongue?
So Otis, they're both adorable, and Mom's absolutely supervising. And, you know, but Otis is kind of in a corner over here. It's also a kitchen area and a doorway. So that's kind of a busy spot, could be potential resource. And nobody is intentionally doing anything that I would say is wrong, but there's a lot of misunderstanding going on. There's many times, and I don't know if you guys picked up on, there's a lot of times Otis looks at the camera, and so many times our dogs check in. I call that a check-in. They check in, and I always tell families, when a dog checks in, they're looking for praise or guidance. They need help in that moment. So they're looking to the trusted adult to kind of help them out, to give them an out. So to help them with praise, you know, offering praise or guidance. So in this situation, you know, I would want to redirect the child away from the dog, allow him to have that space. The other thing is, Otis also, after the closeness and the kissing of the head, goes into suddenly scratching. So scratching is one of those displacement behaviors that's often, I often think of myself like, you know, if I don't want to pay attention to someone, I'm walking in the public and I don't feel like saying hi to everybody or something, I'm awfully busy on my phone, so I don't notice you. I don't notice you now. I'm so busy on this. And that's kind of what the scratch is for the dog, is they're like, nope, reading my email. I don't see you there at all. So we do need to pay attention. And usually behaviors like that, they'll do it until the child or whatever backs off a little bit and gives them a little breathing room, which is exactly what happened here. So it's some of those things. And there also can be a lick to kind of increase distance as well. But everybody has good intentions. No one's intending for this to be a dangerous situation or uncomfortable situation, but there's a lot we could do with a little dog, you know, applying our dog aware skills and saying, all right, he's checking in. So at the first point that Otis checks in with Mom, we could say, you know, offer Otis another option. Maybe we don't want the big dog to move while the little one's right there. So maybe we want to redirect the child. But we need to be aware and look out for those check-ins and then have some options of what to do. Does that make sense? Am I explaining that well, Gail?
Yeah.
I know. And, you know, again, love looks different to our dogs, but space is love to our dogs. Oops, sorry.
Well, it's nice the way the mom was really encouraging the child to pet gently too.
I know.
Wanting to foster a good relationship there.
Absolutely. And that's so clear. And to me, the child was being, you know, kids that age can only be gentle so much. Not only that, but understanding what gentle truly means. So if a child is touching a dog at that stage, I would encourage guided touch, which is my, you know, palm to palm. Can you see me, Gail? Palm to palm? Okay. As the way, if anyway, I don't necessarily encourage it at that stage because, you know, it can be so unpredictable. But if you're going to do touch, I'd rather it be guided touch. So here's just, this one is kind of a crash course in body language and signals. And I just wanted to show it to you. It's very simply, this is actually Colleen Pilar's dog. And her son was filming from and standing on a coffee table, which is really odd human behavior. That's not something normally that happens in their house. And so this was a little strange. And so I want us to look at some of the signals that Enzo offers us in this. We got a big yawn and stretch. Looking in, checking in. All right, you're still, all right, shake off. Well, you're still there. Checking in again, big lick. All right. Not sure what to do. I'll look around. I like the little peering out of the corner of his eye. You can see the eyebrows move. Oh, big lick, big yawn. And, you know, so those are all like, you know, I think so many times families say, but he never growls, or he doesn't, you know, he's always been great with the kid until the bite happened, or he's only growled a couple times. What I want people to really understand and embrace is the fact that dogs communicate with all sorts of little signals, micro expressions, and these little tiny signals, and you know, those were not so tiny, are really important for us to understand with our particular dogs. And the more that we observe and stay curious about what is our dog feeling, saying, you know, what are they communicating with their body language, the safer, well, the more comfortable the world is for them, but the safer our grandchildren and other children would be with those dogs. So I love these little expressions. And yeah, he demonstrates them really well. And what's going on? Nothing major, just something out of the ordinary. So having grandkids visit and having small children crawling on the floor, those kinds of things, is something that would definitely be out of the ordinary. Or maybe just grandkids playing together. That might be out of the ordinary. So watching your dog and thinking, all right, when they check in and make eye contact, what am I going to do? Having a plan. Are they going to, you know, do you have a crate, gate, separate, rotate? That's a big part of what we're going to get to too. Anything you wanted to add there, Gail?
No.
Excellent. I love that video. It's very telling. So everybody tells us to supervise, but I think it's really important that we break it down a little bit more. And I'm going to go through this stuff fairly quickly. We have a handout on this that I will send after the webinar as well. But it is super important, and you can look at it. We also have on our YouTube channel a whole little webinar that goes through this in detail. So I'm not going to go through everything tonight just because it is up there and you can watch that on your own time, and there's some more body language things I really want to get to. But the 5 types of supervision, I broke it down because so many times people hear supervise. And as I said earlier, I was supervising when I took those pictures of my dog being miserable with my kid on its back, you know. So supervision really isn't enough, but even as standalone supervision, I think it's a continuum. There's different aspects of supervision. So let's talk about those. We have absent, which can be a lack of. So absent supervision is when we might be asleep, we might be, you know, in another room, we might have stepped outside to pick up the paper, any number of things. So absent, we can pretty much understand and know. You know, that's, I think we mostly know when absent is. Passive is something, and obviously absent is most dangerous. We want to make sure, especially with babies, that there is not absent supervision. Passive supervision is when there's a distraction, there's something going on. So holiday time is often a real time for all of us to be passively supervising at times. It's easy to have happen. And then there's reactive supervision, which is we might have turned our back for a second, and now, uh-oh, we see the child is right up to the dog, and now we react. And then there's proactive, which is we're thinking ahead. We're making a plan and we're preparing and making sure that our child does not have an opportunity to crawl up to the dog. We're putting up gates. We're doing those kinds of things. And then active, full, awake adult supervision and dog-aware supervision is we know, you know, we're looking at something, we're paying attention to the communication back and forth, and we're actively participating, both eyes on the kids and dogs. So I'll go through just to emphasize a couple of these. So passive supervision, I think, is by far one of the most popular and something we all do. In today's world with so many distractions, it's easy to do. And it's easy to pay attention and then go look and check your phone or your text or anything. So we do need to then be thinking about what are we going to do proactively. Wait, they went right to reactive. So passive supervision. So the example that I really like is, and how I came up with this was, my husband was watching my daughter, and she was crawling around on the floor, and one of my shepherds was in the corner. And when I came downstairs, he's on his laptop. And to me, that is passive supervision. That's not safe. And that can lead to this, reactive supervision, which is when the child gets right up to the dog and the dog is clearly communicating. Here's the big tongue lick. Here's a little tongue lick, but you've got a lot of tension in the face. Here's tension in the face, especially between the eye and the ears. Eyebrows are always there. Tension, lots of tension. Too close. This child might be a little reactive too, but you're too close, and the dog is going to react to that. Again, usually they're checking in. So Moose was checking in, and I actually have a sequence with Bailey there where the next slide he's looking right at me like, move her. So these things happen, but we want to do everything we can to prevent them, but it can happen very quickly. I'm sure you all have seen speed crawlers, Gail.
Oh, yeah.
Speed crawlers, and they go really fast. So even though you feel like, gosh, I'm right here, you have to allow yourself that oops moment and that thought that, well, okay, well, what if something changed really quickly, And it's hard when we're so busy or we're thinking about other things. So this is really important. So that leads me to proactive supervision. And proactive supervision really is planning and preparing ahead, having proper gates, having locks on doors. If you have a reactive dog or a dog that you absolutely know is going to need some space of their own, sometimes I might put a stop sign here or a picture of a sleeping dog with the dog's name, something that indicates don't go in this room. You might have to put the lock up high so that, children can't open it. But it's important to think about what you're going to do to secure your dog. So one of the questions someone asked me was, I don't want to have to put my dog away the whole time, or I feel horrible doing that. And that's a really common concern. I think we talked a little bit about earlier, like breaking it up, maybe not having your dog there for when everybody arrives, and having your dog have some downtime, let people come in, maybe downtime for your dog, and you've got to practice it. You can't just wait until you need it. You have to practice it so it becomes a nice experience for your dog. So having a frozen goodie, something really yummy that they don't usually get, having that be part of it. I don't usually get, like every day, but maybe during your practice times they do. Having white noise on, having nice bed and, good stuff so that they can have their own special space. I always like to do frozen treats, stuff a Kong, stuffed marrow bones, that kind of thing. Go to the butcher shop, get some nice, sturdy, good, solid marrow bones, things like that. And then allowing the dog to have their own space. And then maybe having them come out during, a specific activity, or when things have settled down, or when you're not cooking and preparing, or people aren't opening gifts or excited or whatever, So there can be some times, but having proactive solutions for times that the dog can be away. And you don't you're able to pay attention to guests instead of having to monitor everything. So although we can all feel a little guilty and sad that our dog isn't able to be included with everything, I think it's important to keep in mind that in many cases our dogs don't want to necessarily be around the children. They might want to be around you, and they might want to be around other trusted adults, but they may not be comfortable. And allowing them to go to a success station and have a nice, safe place to be is really the best way to support them during some of these times.
Yeah.
Anything? Go ahead.
The other thing I was going to say as a grandparent is that I think you kind of go into it, or at least I did, a little bit overconfident about, I've been there, I've done that.
Right.
Kids, I know what I'm doing. But when they're not around you every day, it's harder to supervise the children than when and it's hard for a grandparent to admit this, I will say myself. If you're not doing it every minute of every day, it might be once a week, it might be once every 2 weeks, depending on where you live compared to the kids. Some grandparents will see the grandkids every day, but you still don't have them 24/7. So I think what you're saying about active supervision and proactive supervision is even more important in those situations, because I think it's a little bit harder for a grandparent. You're excited about the grandkids being over. You might have gone from no kids around to having 2 or 3, and you're trying to watch all 3 of them with the dog at the same time. It's so much easier if you just put the gate up. And if you only see them once or twice a year, to me, you ask yourself, does the dog really need to even be involved in this? Or
so true.
And do they want to be involved in it? That was a good point you brought up too, because a lot of times the dogs, we want them involved, but my dogs are just as happy, going and chilling out somewhere, and and then when it gets quiet, like you were saying, then they come out and things have settled down a little bit and they're out for a little while and they get exposed, but and then it's a little more controllable.
But it's also important that people practice ahead of time. If grandchildren are visiting regularly, it's even more important that you have a variety of options to go to and that you practice them routinely, because one of the hardest things is to, all of a sudden separate your dog when other things are going on. That becomes like a panic situation for some dogs. They just really, 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 and most of the time incidents happen and parents are there and say, well, what, or people are there and say, well, if he didn't enjoy it, why didn't he leave? And this is where I'm saying, like, watching your dog for those check-ins and those subtle signals is your notice that the dog is a little uncomfortable and you need to give praise or guidance, some kind of intervention, And so what that looks like in that moment might change in 5 minutes, 10 minutes, but a break might be all the dog needs. A break to refuel, recharge, and then things might be a little more comfortable. But I think expecting your dog to always get up and leave when all they want to do is be with the trusted adult, and their person is really hard. So it's very hard for people to understand that they're not going to always make the choice to get up and go. It would be beautiful if they did, but they want to be with us too. They just may not know how to handle a small human, so.
And some dogs really have to actively be taught to leave.
Yeah. Reinforced heavily for leaving. Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
Being alone with you all the time and you're their source of comfort.
I know. It's so hard. So one of the things, here's some different options for management. We can have success station for babies, so we can use play yards. We also can use gate. A lot of people will have a crate for their dog, and I want to, encourage people to, again, think about the location. I know it's desirable a lot of times to want to include your dog and have them, if the crate's going to be out, it's going to be in the living room. That may be okay when you don't have a bunch of, children and guests who want to put their fingers in. So we don't want a dog to feel confined in the sense that they're not safe. they're getting approached by someone, that's that's a growl zone. It can be really stressful. So we don't want that to happen. And we also don't want them in their crate, feeling really agitated or fearful, with lots of activity that maybe they're not as familiar with. So we have to think about the locations of those. But I love different setups so that we have plenty of space. That can be really helpful. Sitting on the floor, I always say a dog and baby on the scene, a parent be in between. Again, here my dog's on a tether on his mat. Here my older daughter is laying on the floor. There's 2 dogs on the other side. So she's the human barrier. So Kelsey wouldn't get past. Those are all options, but being sure that you're in between and being sure that everybody's secured. So lots of options. And then after proactive supervision, we really, really, really love for active, full awake adult supervision. So, I know holidays can be a time that people, there can be all sorts of things going on. There can be lots of food. There can be sometimes drinking. There can be, excitement and all sorts of things. And so we just want to remember that awake adult, full active supervision is what we're looking for the safest environment, especially with young children. It's really, really, really important. And sometimes when we have those family gatherings, we really want to be able to relax. And it's really hard to watch small children and dogs, especially when you have that combination of food and everything else. So keep that in mind and think about that as you prepare and what's going to work best for your dog. Sometimes, Gail, I've told people too, if it's rare that they have a full house and they have a full house only at the holidays. Are there other options for the dog?
Yeah.
Is there a nice little doggy getaway that they can do just to kind of avoid the situation and not have it be a setup?
Yeah.
Or, it's horrible when, something happens and it's only in this kind of situation. So I really encourage people to think about that.
And oftentimes in those situations, if you ask their dog what they would prefer to do, they'd rather be away too.
Yeah, I'm thinking.
Yeah.
So another aspect that we need to pay attention to while we're supervising is looking at locations. So these are some examples of what I reference as growl zones, grumble zones, and growl zones. So I always say crowded spaces, grumpy faces, and it's true. Dogs don't necessarily, conflicts can happen when there's a crowded space. There's no question. Often, living room setups can be rather crowded. It's not unusual for people to have a coffee table here and have food on that and, people sitting on the couch. And this is a really crowded area. So there could be conflict for the food. There could be, a dog might have some resource guarding where they're hanging out over here in the corner on the couch. We've got to think about those things ahead of time. Lots of times dogs can decide that under the table is their happy place. It's nice and cozy. That's not unusual, but it also can be risky. If you get down on a toddler's level and see, well, that dog is right eye level, but this dog might also have a need to guard this space. It might be places that high value, wonderful things often appear magically, especially when there's big gatherings. So we want to be really careful about this and just, again, a little foresight into this and thinking about it ahead of time. What can I do? Mealtime, when food's out, what are we going to do? So having a plan and kind of having a doggy schedule for those gathering times. This is classic. I remember being a small child and crawling under the table, and I think everybody does that, and tickling people's feet and stuff. Yep. I was that kid, and I'm sure there was a dog or two under there, and but it's a little different now. I don't know exactly why, but if the dog growled, as when I was a child, it was definitely my fault. Now it is automatically the dog's fault. And, you know, I definitely encourage people to think of it as the adult's fault. Like, we just need to think and kind of be thinking about, what can we do to set our dog up for success and prevent some of these situations? We know that dogs could guard their food. We know to leave dogs alone when they're eating their dinners or having a bone. So it's not a big leap to think, well, if they're under the table at meal times, perhaps that's not a place, you know, if we're focused on the conversation above the table and we don't want to focus on what's going on underneath, then we need to make sure the dog's in another place. Yeah. So proactive supervision. Here's a great example of a living room that originally had that kind of couch and table set up, and then we opened it up so there was a little more space. That gives the dog some area to move around instead of going through this tight space to get to mom. But, you know, just making it less crowded so that the dog can easily move and they have an escape route. So they can go, they can leave. So a growl zone, we definitely, you know, it's when there's possible several escape routes, but the dog is kind of conflicted about choosing them. It might be cluttered. It might be, I speak for my house, it could be a hallway, it could be a stairway, it could be any number of things. And a growl zone basically is an area that the dog is going to feel more confined, or they're choosing not to, they're choosing to stay with a resource, like the food source, that kind of thing. So under the table was a good example of growl zone. So anything you wanted to add, like here's a growl zone, and here's a growl zone. These are all growl zones under tables. Lots of bites happen there.
And sometimes the dogs will choose to be there also, even though it's an uncomfortable space. If they have a child in a high chair or something, you can stop them food.
Yes.
And they start learning pretty quick that, you know, even though they're not comfortable with it, they'll choose to be closer just so they could grab some snacks.
It's definitely super reinforcing for them in those situations, enough so that even it kind of, you know, is higher value. So they're going to say, all right, even if they're uncomfortable, they're still going to choose that option. But what I find in those cases is that, you know, a lot of people want to, they feel that they're building a bond by, you know, good stuff coming off the high chair. And that all may be good to a certain point. But if the child reaches and touches the dog with their hand and there's no food, some dogs that pushes them over the edge because the food was with the motivator, not the child, right? And so, and now the child has closed the gap and is actually approaching. Yeah. So it can be confusing and deceiving. So we have to always be thinking like, what is it? And I prefer to have controlled kind of, if it is a high chair situation, have the dog wait on a mat and then do a cleanup cue and then have them be able to do it, versus my child. I had a problem with my daughter she thought it was adorable. She thought it was so funny when the dog would take her food. And so she would not have eaten any food because she'd be, you know, doing that. So handing it to the dog.
The problem where the child has a snack and they're walking through the house.
Yeah.
And the dog just goes up and takes it from them too.
Right. They feel it's a free-for-all, right? So we want to be careful about that. All right. So other just subtle examples. So it's really interesting because so many times our dogs are showing us subtle signals, but we miss it. We don't even see it. So here Cassian has not a lot of space, but you can see the dogs are pretty relaxed, right? Panting, pretty relaxed. You can see a difference in these. Okay. So, and I will tell you that I was in the room and there were two other people in the room. So this distance, she was doing that like T-Rex, 16-month-old walk or 14 months, unbalanced. But as soon as she went close to close the gap, and here's my son coming to redirect her, he checked in with me. So you see he's looking towards me, he's looking towards the camera like, help. And of course, we do get help in there. But it was something that after this happened, it was clear, especially because I had pictures of it, to say, even to my older kids, like, do you see he's not comfortable here? What can we do to prevent this kind of situation from happening? But there are sometimes things happen very quickly. So when it does, we want to distract one or both. So distract the child or distract the dog. I love having a touch cue. So where my dog knows, I say touch, and they're come to my hand, their nose to my palm. Or with Bailey, with the husky here, I would tell him take off, and he would bolt upstairs. When they check in, they're really looking for praise or guidance from you. It's like an uh-oh moment. Kids do it too, but I mean, I think it's something most of us don't pay attention to. And so you'll be amazed what you notice when you start paying attention. So, okay at this distance, not okay when she closes the gap. That's not unusual, especially with toddlers. Here's another example. So up here, so the dog is actually just hanging out, just totally hanging out. Mom's actually out of the picture here, like by the camera person. And the child is just doing their thing. They're not at all paying attention to the dog, likewise in the previous images. But you can notice a change between the dog in this image. So maybe that ear on the right is sort of listening in. But then as the child rounds that corner, and these might be hard wheels on this concrete, so we don't know. It could be, I'm betting that it's the vehicle, the piece of equipment that's actually stressing out the dog, and the approach is the sound and all that, which, is important to pay attention to. But what I want you to pay attention to is the fact that the dog's body language, this is a dog who doesn't get up and walk away, but they're still communicating, oh, that was different. I don't know how, I feel a little uncomfortable. And so I think that's really important. A lot of us would miss these subtle signals with the eyebrows and the ears going a little more and the head lowering. It's important to pay attention to that. And meanwhile, the child's not doing anything to this dog. They're just doing their thing, which is often the case. So here's over here, the dog's even more looking away, turned down here, big lick. Okay, so this is a great time where you could say, redirect the dog, touch, have them move to another spot instead of sitting right there where it is a little loud and maybe they don't know. Maybe having the dog come over next to the mom and being able to see the approach of the car and, do treats and things like that. There's a lot of different things that we might do, but it might be a good idea to also have the child run that car a little bit away. So this communication gives you information as to what might be going on in your dog's mind. And when you have lots of kids or you have young children playing, paying attention to these subtle micro expressions, I think is super, super important. Gail, you like this series?
Yeah, I do. And I think to me, it points out, like, if this was happening live time, I don't know that I would have noticed that. And I think this shows how useful looking at pictures can be.
Yeah.
Go back and look back at pictures you've taken where the child and the dog are in the same shot. You can pick up a lot more about what makes them uncomfortable. Sometimes because most likely whoever was taking these pictures was watching the child, not necessarily focusing on the dog.
Well, and the other thing that you bring up, which I think is excellent, and I encourage people to do, is photos are really, really really helpful for us to understand and get a little more insight and really test our dog aware skills. Because all these little expressions, the more you see it, the more you feel it, right? You start going, oh, that's associated with that. My dog typically does this. So you start to know if they're tweaking their ears. You start immediately looking, ears, eyes, tail, muzzle, gather all the clues. and figure out what's going on. So it does, the more you kind of train your eye to do it, the faster it happens. And I think you start feeling it versus seeing all these tiny little things. So it's just the shift in the shoulders is enough to say, all right, come on over here, you know?
And the more you do that, the more the dog relies on you to get them out of situations rather than taking them into their own hands too. Like when
Exactly.
you're paying attention to that and that you're noticing that they're getting a little uncomfortable when they do that check-in, I noticed that they start doing it more and more as far as checking over to you, like, hey, is this okay? What should I do now?
And so a lot of times that allows them, you know, it gives you that moment of wiggle room to help them out of that situation. And for, you know, so it's really two-way communication, but it's so important. And the more a dog is encouraged and reinforced for checking in with their trusted adult, the more likely they will, as you say. And that hopefully helps prevent us getting to that growl and bite.
Yep.
Because I always consider a growl like a scream, help! And just like I wouldn't, you know, shut my child down or say, no, don't ever say help to me. Don't ever come to me for that. I wouldn't want to do that with my dog. I feel like they're trying to communicate all the time. We're just a little, you know, not always on the receiving end of that. And so a growl is really, they've been communicating and now they're really screaming out. And then a bite is, boy, they're really, you know, really off the charts. So usually there's a progression of how things go, but the more we respond to their subtle signals, the more likely we're going to see them. So it's really important that we have predictability. Our dogs rely on body language. They like patterns, they like predictability. And so one of the things that we know about toddlers is they're completely unpredictable. Everything changes the way they move. So my daughter approaching Bailey, this is not a good situation. It's the same picture as before. That's an oops moment. It's one of those times that I love. For those moments, I'm telling you, I love that he wags his tail in a heartbeat. So I could go, who's a boo-boo, who's a boo-boo, and he would just wiggle and wag. And that's kind of a cool thing, is to be able to get your dog to wag and shift that body language and get their attention to give you that moment to intervene and get the child away. So because those moments will happen, so practicing wag your tail, shake your booty, whatever you want to call it, making that a fun cue where your dog wiggles and wags is kind of cool. And it's hysterical to teach, so have fun with that. But, you know, inviting the dog over is predictable versus having a child approach the dog. So that is going to be incredibly important. Hold on, I think it goes. So here is a little, so here, this is an example of free touch. We talked about this a little bit earlier. If young children are going to be touching and there's no need for them to be touching a dog necessarily, I know we all want to see that, but it may not be in their best interest and it may not be the comfort level of our dog. It's, you know, we have I think we all have this desire to see closeness or physical contact, a connection. But sometimes that connection is just being together. It's not physical touch or interaction. If there is going to be any kind of physical touch and using a hand, I want it to be guided touch, but so that these fingers aren't able to grab the dog's fur. So that's incredibly important. We always want to invite the dog over. We don't want to do like I did here 18 years ago where, you know, plant the child there and the, you know, we want to invite the dog over. Dogs should always have a choice. We never, ever, ever want to force interaction. It's always an option, you know. A lot of people, it's interesting. If you're sitting there and you're holding your grandchild and you call your dog over, don't be surprised if your dog goes, no thanks. Nope, I'll be over here. And you might want to try turning your the grandchild this, you know, so they're not facing directly at the dog. That's one option. You can see if that encourages the dog to come closer, or you might just say, okay, blow a kiss. I love to demonstrate blowing kisses, waving, talking about their body language, broadcasting to your grandkids what you see. Oh, he's not interested right now. That's okay. Good dog, So the more that you help kids to know, hey, it's up to the dog too. If they're choosing not to come over, that's a good choice in that moment for that dog. And we're going to honor that. So anything you want to add there, Gail?
Yeah, other than it's a little bit, it's hard to do that as a grandparent. When I'd have my grandson on my lap and he would be patting his leg to try to get the dogs to come over and they wouldn't do it. And I could see how disappointed he is. And as a grandparent, you tend to spoil your grandkids a little bit more than parents do. I'll admit that. So then he would actually take my hand and have me pat my leg and he still wouldn't come over.
Right.
And so there's a lot of, you have to really fight yourself to not, to make sure that you're respecting the dog. And one of the things that we do then is like, okay, they don't want to come over. And I'll point that out to him. And it's like, why don't we go do something else for the dogs? And maybe we'll go into the kitchen and make a snack for the dog. So that way he's kind of interacting without interacting, and it kind of gives you a little bit of a way to get them to interact without interacting too. And take care of that grandma guilt.
Feed them. Interacting without physical contact. Yeah. So thinking of creative things, like what could you do? Get up and go into another room and make, give a treat or do different things. But yeah, so it can be challenging.
Get out some paper and draw a picture of the dog.
Draw a picture of the dog, talk about, play doggy detective, look at the ears, the eyes, the tail, the muzzle, talk about it. You think he's happy, sad? What do you think? Asking kids what they think is always really interesting. If he had words, what would he be saying? Another thing we do to try to help encourage positive interaction when, if children are touching dogs, is one hand's enough, two hands too rough. And the reason that I like this is because so often kids want to go, my husband too. He loves to take my dog's face, and, I think a lot of us do. And that could not go well sometimes. And even though that might be, again, something that a trusted adult might do and have a different relationship and might have, whatever, it's not something we want our kids doing. And two hands can get a little rougher, get into this action versus petting. So we want to encourage one hand enough, two hands too rough. And I think it's easier, kids are gentler when they do one hand. That's at least what I have found. And it's been really helpful with my daughter as she grew up. And it's one of the things. I think it also is less potential for confining the dog, for hugging the dog or grabbing the dog, so that's a good one to remember. So here's just a simple game, fun activity. This is with Bailey and my daughter. She's just counting.
Simon. Did you find it? There you go, boo-boo.
So she's just doing numbers, just counting. Or A, drop a treat, move to another spot. B, drop a treat. So he wasn't into, and he's very interested because there was food. So he wasn't interested in so much physical touch with her. He was getting to the point that he wanted that with her. But lots of these little things, like walking 3 steps, dropping a treat, walking, 1, 2, 3, 4, treat, 1, 2, 3, 4, treat, or 1 treat, 2 treat, walking around. It's just simple pattern games, simple things that, kids can do, or older kids giving them a math problem, 2 + 2, and then they have to take 4 steps, drop a treat, any kind of thing that you can do creatively that's engaging and interacting, but not physical touch. Those kinds of activities really do help build the bond and help the dog also become familiar with the child's motion, voice, how they move, all those things, which really, really is helpful. No, I think it's doing the same thing. Sorry. So here's some other ways because we want to include dogs. So even, in the backyard, 2 kids with treats, behind their back, and they each call the dog, playing a name game, just calling the dog from one kid to the next, to the next, to the next. And then when the dog comes and sits, they get a treat, something like that. I like using hand signals with dogs and children because it's easy to teach a sit cue and a down, even early with young children. But my dog Bailey, who you saw in most of the pictures with some of the discomfort, and he ended up, when my daughter was probably about 4, really being the one to initiate interaction and really going to her. I always say he was her after school dog. So, she had a morning routine dog and then a bedtime dog, and Bailey was her after school dog. He waited for her so he could snuggle on the couch with her and that kind of thing. But it takes time, 3 and 4 is more predictability in their motion and their movement. They're not as threatening to a dog or uncomfortable. Dogs can go, up, you're small adult, like small human. I'm familiar with how those move. Playing fetch, just enjoying time together. These are just some fun. These are not so good. These are often pictures that I will see, which make me really uncomfortable. But a lot of people don't understand that they're not a good idea. Sitting on dogs happens much more than I would ever like to see. It's unfortunate. Dogs are not for sitting. I jokingly said I had an experience with that just recently. I was like, if it has hair, it's not a chair. But then I watched my daughter ride a horse, and that threw that one out the window. But sit on the ground, not the hound. It's so important that we don't think this is cute. Excuse me. I often tell people to think about, is this strengthening the bond or weakening the bond? And we want to go for what's strengthening. If there's a potential, if we're asking ourselves, or we're saying, they got away with it, then most likely it's a weakening the bond. Excuse me. Situation. We want to be careful. Here are my boys. This is one of my first Kiss to Dismiss pictures. It's my boys with one of our old dogs, and they're bombarding her. She's crowded. And so what does she do? She licks away my son. She gives a nice big lick, and she's lifting her paw. So those are both indications that back off, leave me alone, but we didn't know what we were looking at. So these are just things that we want to provide more education to avoid. Again, I don't think anybody does these things ever thinking it's ever being in a ill intent way, but it's just, we've got to change the way we look at it. And definitely approaching a dog who's uncomfortable, and letting that play out is not the situation we want to encourage. These are situations. So having kids help prepare food treats and puzzle toys for the dogs is a super great fun thing to include them, like you were saying, Gail. Mm-hmm. And then just downtime, just being together, just hanging out together. Here, it's my daughter and a friend's dog. They were doing puzzle games, so puzzle toys. And those can be quite interactive. Some of the wood puzzles, and the dog has to find the treat and stuff. Be creative, and you can use you can do all sorts of things with those. So find some things that are interactive that you can include your grandkids with at whatever age they are. If you need more ideas on that, we're always happy to help. We are really interested in creating dog-aware generations. We encourage people to reach out if they ever have any questions. We have educators all over the world. And if we don't have someone in your area, we would be happy to try to find support and resources for you. But I appreciate your interest and attending. I'm curious, I'm going to stop the recording now and see if we have any questions.
Hey, Jen, can I add in one more?
Yeah, yep,
comment?
of
that-
course.
As far as, like having grandkids and dogs coming over, and again, depends on how often the dog comes over, or you go over to the, take your dog over to see the grandkids. But dogs don't understand that babies will become adults. And babies change so often. And when the
I
dog
know.
with the baby, it's still not easy for them. But when the dog doesn't see the baby very often, all those changes that we know are coming, the dog has absolutely no clue. And so every time the dog comes over, they've got to get used to a whole new set of behaviors from that child. So it can take a lot longer sometimes for a grandparent's dog to get used to children
Mhm.
than a dog who lives with them all the time too. And I think that's something it's important for people
Definitely.
to kind of see coming.
Yeah, it's sometimes we just don't even think about it,
Yeah.
So excellent point. And yes. Well, Gail, I appreciate you talking and joining us and giving your perspective.
Thank you.
And I hope that this has been helpful, and we will post a recording. So I hope that it helps many people. And it's always fun doing webinars with you. Do we have any questions? All right. All righty. Well, I appreciate you guys attending. I know I apologize for the length